Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Babies in Common Show. I'm Jeanette.
And I'm Melissa. Welcome, listeners. As a reminder, any information shared during the show is not to be taken as medical advice. Please consult your own care providers for questions about you or your baby's health and visit babiesincommon.com/disclaimer to read more.
Awesome. So today is Wednesday, November 18th, 2020, and today we'll be talking about the process of opening a freestanding birth center, and we'll explain what that means too. Our guest today is Kirsten Kowalski-Lane, who's a midwife and co-founder of the Seven Sisters Midwifery and Community Birth Center in Northampton, Massachusetts. I'm so excited to have you with us. We're both so excited to have you today, Kirsten. You have done so much since the last time I saw you, which was probably, I think, at a little hole-in-the-wall restaurant 9 years ago when you were a home birth midwife in Western Mass, and you've done a lot since then. You went to Yale and got your certified nurse midwifery degree, worked in hospitals, and now you've literally built a birth center from the ground up. And we've been watching it on social media, and I'm excited to hear about the process so that maybe Melissa and I and a bunch of other our colleagues can help it happen more often in this state. And so we're curious about your decision making of going from home birth midwife to hospital to birth center, and how do you even make a birth center happen these days? And I know a lot of people over the years have said, oh, I wish we had a birth center here. And, we've been around long enough to be like, well, there used to be one in Wellesley. And but people don't realize, they're like, well, I want to create one. And I've known a couple people that have said, I'm going to start a birth center. And I'm like, are you going to raise $1 million? And do you have X, Y, and Z to back you up? So you can tell us the update on how to make it happen. But so maybe you'll be able to inspire people not only to go to your birth center to have their babies, but also to start a birth center themselves wherever they're listening from. So yeah. So thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's great to meet you, Kirsten. And being a longtime maternity nurse myself, this topic is very dear to my heart. And I agree, it's been really exciting to watch you through your Facebook page and other social media. We're picking the tile today, or the tubs come in today, and watching all the updates on the birth center. So I encourage all of our listeners to visit sevensistersmidwifery.com and follow you on social media to learn more about your team and the services you provide. But before we get into your story and your amazing birth center, let's start with some definitions, because Jeanette knows how much I love definitions.
Oh, she does.
The American Association of Birth Centers defines a birth center as a home-like setting where care providers, usually midwives, provide family-centered care to healthy pregnant women. Most birth centers are located separately from hospitals, while a few are physically inside hospital buildings. In-hospital birth centers must meet certain criteria and standards for independence and must be separate from labor and delivery units in order to be considered as true birth centers. And one thing I will say as a labor and delivery nurse is nobody really regulates who uses the word like birthing center. And so there are a lot of hospital labor and delivery wards around our state, around our country, that say that they are a maternity center or a birthing center. And they're named after usually the donor that gave money to redo that ward of the hospital. But they are not birth centers. They are hospitals.
Yeah,
exactly. So we're talking about a true birth center, an out-of-hospital home-like birth environment. And in the United States, this is pretty uncommon because 98.8% of births take place in hospital labor and delivery units, with physicians, mostly obstetricians, attending 86% of these births. This is very different from other countries, other industrialized nations, which we've talked about in other episodes. In contrast, 0.3% of births take place in birth centers, where nurse midwives and other direct entry midwives provide most of the care. And among women who give birth in hospitals, approximately 85% are considered low risk. So think about that. 85% of the pregnant people that are giving births in hospitals around our country actually would be great candidates for a birth center birth, an out-of-hospital birth. So
that's crazy, 0.3%. So it's like, how they always say like, ooh, the 1%, the top 1%. So in that, you're rare to have a birth center, right? But really the population that could come see you is so big. So the growth potential for your birth center and others is large. So that's sad because there's a lot of low risk, healthy people that just don't even know what their options are. that they are giving birth in
Absolutely.
high risk hospitals, and so many low risk people. Of course, we've all heard someone say, "Oh, well, I want to be at the hospital because they have a NICU." It's like, yeah, but you're low risk and you don't need the NICU. But being in the hospital, in some cases, could raise your risk of even having to need the NICU. And if you gave birth outside of it, that would
Mhm.
lower your risk for needing the NICU.
100%.
So, uh,
Absolutely.
yeah, it depends. And we're so glad that hospitals and NICUs are available for those who need them, just for the record. Right. Okay. So, Kirsten, let's start with your introduction to the world of birth. So, if I remember correctly, weren't you a doula before you were a midwife? And like, what was your experience? Like, where'd you have your babies? Like, kind of what got you into this?
So yes, I was a doula. That's absolutely true. When I got pregnant, well, my very first pregnancy ended in a miscarriage. I say that right out loud because so many people have miscarriages and
Yeah.
the end of the world. And I am one of those people who is in that camp. And it was very devastating for me the first time around. But luckily got pregnant again, was in grad school, getting a master's in public policy at the time. And I remember that, I remember walking into the local OB office. I had no idea what I was doing. I really had spent very little time in healthcare, and looking at these kind of pictures that were on the wall. And there was this one group of kind of elderly white men, that's just the truth, and a group of lovely sort of middle-aged and younger women on the other side. And they were like, and it was like, these are the midwives and these are the doctors. And this receptionist said, did you want to go with the midwives or the doctors? And I was like, definitely those people on the wall up there who look really like, no, I mean, really, I had hardly ever gone, to the doctor, and I barely knew what a midwife was. I had a sister-in-law who had some home births, and but that was when I was much, much younger. I was in like middle school, so I'd heard the
And
word, but didn't really know what it was.
no
So,
offense to white men, we're all married to white men.
no, it's true, but it was a little, it was quite definitely like all gray haired, a little bit wrinkled, and it just wasn't the vibe. It didn't throw
Yeah.
the vibe out to me. So I chose, as that goes to say, I chose to have my first baby in the hospital. I really didn't even think that there was any other option, but luckily enough, I lived in a community that had midwives, and midwives just kind of fell into my lap as an option. So my first birth was a hospital birth at Cooley Dickinson Hospital. It's a town that I live in. And it was absolutely fine. I will say it was fine. I had a lovely midwife, really was great. I was the only patient in the hospital that day, the only person there. So I got a lot of special attention. And I had a fiery midwife who happened to have originally started her career as a home birth midwife for many years in Florida, and who actually taught at the Florida School of Traditional Midwifery and then became a nurse midwife. So I definitely lucked out and had somebody who really, believed in me wanting to have a natural birth. And I did. And I had a direct OP baby. For those of you who know what
Ooh.
that is, who came out in 25 minutes. And he was great. It was great. It was, there was never any vibe of like, this isn't going to happen. And I know my midwife knew that he was OP and never told me. She was just like,
Wow.
good, we're just going to go. So that was my first birth. And I felt very empowered within myself. I mean, the hospital certainly didn't make me feel empowered in any way, except for my one midwife. Everything else felt like, a lot of people bothering me when I just wanted to be left alone. And I felt like I had a lot of intuitive ability to care for myself and my baby. And I just wanted that, and a little less of a zillion people coming in and out of my space. So it was good. It was fine. And then after I gave birth, I joined a mother's group pretty quickly. And I discovered that I was the rare commodity, like that I had a normal vaginal birth without induction, with nothing extra, and just did it. That there was nobody in the room with me who had that experience. And I was like, this is crazy. How can this be the fact? And it just really, I think I mean, I have an academic sort of brain, and I was very confused. I'm like, well, this should work. There's all these humans that are on the planet, and why would all these people need so much help and so many interventions? And I never even considered having a C-section for a second. Like, it never even crossed my mind. And then I was sitting in a room with half the people in my baby group had C-sections. And I was like, this can't be right. just
Mhm.
really piqued my interest in birth. And I started just reading like crazy, just trying to figure out, what do I read? What can I figure? What's out there? And I remember stumbling across an Ina May Gaskin book, her original spiritual midwifery, but also like an old Williams obstetrics book, and articles, and Mothering magazine. And, I used to like tape
Rest in
articles.
peace.
Rest-
I have a
uh,
huge stack somewhere, Melissa. You should ask me if you want to look at them again.
yeah, exactly.
Oh,
And
I
the
know
more
that.
I
Rest
read,
in
the
peace,
more,
Mothering magazine.
yes, I know. The more interested I got in birth in general, but also I realized that I had just gone to school for something that was going to kind of put me behind a desk probably for the rest of my
Mm.
life. And the more time I spent with other mothers, and the more time I spent with babies, and the more interested I became in birth, I was like, I don't think it was wrong to have gone, but I didn't feel like it was my calling. And I truly felt like this was a calling. Like I wanted it so much that it became my every, waking moment that wasn't focusing on my child. So
You got bit by the birth bug. We
got bit
know how that feels.
it never stopped. And I got pregnant again shortly after 9 months after I had my son, 10 months after I had my son.
Wow. Yeah.
Pretty closely spaced, and decided to have a home birth the second time around. And, really like, even today, I will never say that I received bad care from my midwifery practice that I went to with my son, but the quality of care was so dramatically different. I was like, this feels like so much more just interest in me as a human,
Yeah.
as somebody having a second baby, as what was my life like, the details, what did I want, why was I making this choice, like just a completely different experience. And during that time period, I started becoming more interested in becoming a doula as well. So I was kind of starting to study towards becoming a doula and being pregnant the second time. And then I was blessed and had a absolutely, life-changing home birth. It's true. I had one of those. It was amazing. I miss my house where my daughter was born. We live in a different house now, and I still think about how much that room meant to me, how much more it meant after she was born in that room. So, what this kind of said to me was that this kind of experience shouldn't be so difficult to have. And at the time I thought, well, here's what I know. I can be someone's help. I can be with someone. I don't know all the tools. I don't know everything about what it takes. I don't know all the language. I don't know all the technicalities of birth, but I can just be with someone and I can learn, right? I know what worked for me. I can start talking to people. I can take a doula training and I'll start to learn. But the most important thing is just to be an observer, to be present, to answer what people's needs are. And even as a midwife today, that's really what I do. That's the absolute basic piece of what being a midwife is listening and figuring out what someone needs and helping them get there, whatever that is.
It's like the literal definition of midwife, right? Being with woman. And I know not all birth givers identify as women, but it being with and holding space for is very much central to the role of being a midwife.
Absolutely.
I love what you said.
So when did you
too.
actually become a?
Oh, wait, hold on. I wanted to highlight what you said about the house. So Melissa and I have both also had fabulous life-changing home births. And what's also interesting is that, so you sold your house. So we sold our house where I had a home birth, and my son, who was born at home, keeps saying, you sold that house and that was my birthright to stay in that house where I was born. So he'll never let me live that one down. And then Melissa just sold her house last week. So make sure you get some good pictures of that room for little Marcy.
I know. I was actually, when you were saying that, I was thinking like, oh, I think we have to have like a candle ceremony in that room or something before we leave, because it is so special.
We changed the orientation of the bed before a few years after I had my daughter, and I literally moved the bed back to like facing the original direction and put the same quilt on it that we had on it when she was born. And I took pictures because I just wanted to remember exactly that moment and like what I was looking at and where the window was, because it's just, I wanted a little a little photograph of that in my mind. I mean, I have lots of great pictures right after she was born. I don't look that great in any of those pictures.
No, it's not about that. But like, when's the last time have you ever in all of our lives had a family as they're leaving the hospital turn around and take a picture of the room? Like, do they remember the
Right.
room number? Do they take a
You know
picture?
what's so funny, Jeanette? That's so funny that you say that, because we just this week had a couple who had a baby with us 2 weeks ago, and they moved out of their house and they're now living in an apartment and like waiting to buy a house, but the market has, kind of gone crazy. And they called us up and they said,
Mhm.
we want to take pictures with our son and we don't want to take them in this house. And we were thinking about what room in the world means the most to us right now. And they said, the room where he was born.
Oh,
Oh, that's so sweet.
They came to the birth center yesterday with their photographer and took
Aw.
pictures in that room. She's like,
Oh my
because
gosh.
she's like, this room will mean everything to me. And you're right. Nobody ever said that about a hospital room, I don't think. And it's a sweet room.
yeah.
It's very pretty, but it's also what happened there. And it's that feeling of like she
Right.
felt held in that space by, I believe, by me, by Ginny, who's my midwifery partner, by the nurse who was with us that day. It's that feeling, and the fact too that it is a clinical space, but somewhere along the line we came to believe that like it had to really feel like a clinical space. And I feel like, we have all the stuff, we just don't make it be in your face
Right.
all the time. We feel like,
Sure.
working in a peaceful, beautiful environment is meaningful to people, like to that creates a sense of calmness and peace. And when you look up and you're on your hands and knees on a hospital bed and all you see is a wall full of suction and valves and
Right.
And the emergency cord.
emergency cords and all of these kinds of things, like it just makes your brain go, where am I? What is this? You're like, your primitive brain goes, I would like to crawl into the closet like a cat and give birth at the back of the closet with the shoes and the extra blankets, and not in, and not in this space where I'm like,
It's so true.
industrial complex kind of it's in your face. And then the sounds too. Oh, the sound. I've worked in the hospital too, and for, a chunk of my career, and the noise is one of those things that just drives me bananas. The constant beeping and chirping and just this, it's just endless. Even when you're trying to rest or sleep, it's an endless amount of weird, staccato of machines, which just can't help but affect your brain and make you feel like this is a mechanized process. Machines are helping me to do this. And it's not a pleasant space to be
Yeah,
in.
that's why I'm always highlighting to people who are having hospital births in our classes, like, use earbuds, put earbuds in your ears. If someone needs to talk to you, they will pull one out or tap on your shoulder. Like, you need to have some other sound in there.
Yeah,
Really affects
absolutely.
I
us.
agree. I'm always saying like bring like fairy lights or those battery operated candles. Like one midwife that I worked with when I worked in Cambridge, absolutely, she would always throw a sheet over the clock because of course the clock was directly on the other side of the bed, so that when you were like pushing, you were staring directly at the clock. And she would always like throw a big sheet over it, like, you don't need to see this. And so I learned that trick as well. Like,
no clocks in the birth room. There is a tiny little clock that's on the phone that hangs on the wall. And so that's what we all wear watches and things like that. And that's what we call time of
sure.
Never have a clock in a birth room. I'm just like, that is the antithesis. You do not need to see the clock when you are in labor. It's a terrible thing.
Absolutely.
But anyway, sort of back to where we
So I'm guessing that.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, no, I'm guessing that, creating this birth center, was inspired as you're describing. It's not just the wallpaper. Hospitals can have a beautiful wallpaper. It's more than that, right? It's holding space for your patient and allowing them to get to where they need to be physically, emotionally, spiritually, to reach deep down inside and give birth. I'm assuming that your work in home birth kind of informed the way you wanted your birth center to be. So can you speak a little bit about when you first became a midwife? Because we've talked about how you had 2 unmedicated births, one of which was at home. Then you were like, oh, I've got bit by the birth bug, I need to become a doula. But then you became midwife, but you didn't first go to certified nurse midwifery school. So can you tell us more about like how you came to that decision,
Sure.
and about your time in home birth?
Yeah. And I will say it was a very shocking decision to most people because I, was somebody who had a bachelor's degree and a master's degree. And so what kind of person would then go to I did barefoot midwifery school, which was Elizabeth Masnick's. And so who does that, has that sort of career, got my master's with a 4.0. And my mom was like, what is this barefoot midwifery school? It's not even an accredited, why aren't you going to like Stanford or something like that? I was like,
you showed her later though.
Pen.
So I did, I worked as a doula for a chunk of time, and I did about 100 births as a doula. And kind of the more births that I did, kind of in conjunction with having had this kind of fantastic home birth experience, I just started to think like, I don't want to learn about birth from a very medicalized perspective first. I always had in the back of my mind, I might do more someday, but I really felt like I wanted to go back to kind of the ancient art and that connection that my home birth midwives had to what felt like sort of the true principles of midwifery and birth. And I just didn't feel like I was going to get that in a hospital sort of driven programs, which certified nurse midwife programs are. They are, and they are. I appreciated everything that I eventually got in my CNM, but I am so very glad that I did what I did first, because I learned normal first. And I know that they say they try.
Yeah, you didn't have to unlearn.
You didn't have to unlearn. They try so hard in nurse midwifery school to say, we want you to understand normal, except then you go and you do your births in the hospital and you never get to see normal, or you start to see normal, which then derails off of normal, often because of things that we did, not because of things that the birthing person did. So that, that was, I talked to my home birth midwives, I talked to other people in the community. The first thing I did is BJ McKinnon, who used to be one of the midwives at the Wellesley Birth Center, and she was the service director there. She had a program called Stepping Stones to Midwifery. I did that first. And that just kind of deepened my love for what I wanted to do. And then it was very clear to me at a certain point, I was like, I knew I wanted to do something, else besides just, I should not say just is the wrong word. I wanted to know more. I didn't know what I wanted to do with it, but I wanted to know more than I knew as a doula. I got frustrated that I felt like there was a part where my education had taken me to a certain place, and I wanted to understand what more I could do to support people in birth, because I absolutely have an incredible respect for what doulas do. And they do things that are at times much more important than I can do as a midwife, especially when they're working in hospital situations. They bring something to birth that without them, we could never achieve in hospital settings. But I had reached a point where I knew that that's what I wanted. And so I trained as a midwife, and then I apprenticed, and then I spent some time in Belize and worked in a hospital setting there. And a hospital there is a low resourced setting, a very low resource setting. So I remember when I arrived at that hospital to work, they said to me, we have 1 vial of Syntocin, which is Pitocin, and one vial, and they catch in their unit 80 babies a month. Yeah. So then the midwives there were like, when we put in an IV, we never miss. When we, do a birth, we do mostly using our hands to prevent hemorrhage. You need to be incredibly watchful, but also they don't medicate anybody. So everybody's just having their babies without any other medications, without any interventions. And shockingly, we had few hemorrhages. We had very few times where we needed to step in and intervene. So I spent a bunch of time training, and then I really went into practice in 2006 or so. It was around 2006, and I started working with another midwife, and I worked with her for a couple of years, and then I switched practices and went to work with River Valley Midwives, which has been a practice that was in Western Mass for a long time, and worked with Jarna Harvey Amai and Kristen Bernard, and loved it. I mean, I loved everything about being a home birth midwife, trucking all over the countryside with all of my stuff, working with all different kinds of people. I was very blessed early on in my career to connect with a Plain community, which is in my area, of Mennonites, and I have been their midwife for their community and still am. So when people say, well, you don't do home births at all anymore, I actually still do, but only for one community, and that's it. But I've caught every baby in that community that didn't have to go to the hospital. There've been some twins, and a few other, some hypertension cases that have had to go into the hospital, but it's many, many, many babies. Yeah. And I stopped doing that.
That's incredibly special.
That's awesome.
That must be like, you must be so honored to be trusted by that community.
And, I play a different role after so many years of being out there. I'm also the person who they call now for issues with menopause, and if something's up with their partner or, their kid, and they're wondering if they should, get a vaccine for something or not, asthma, whatever it is, they'll call me for just about anything. So I'm kind of like the village nurse practitioner for them, which I love.
So sweet.
I have one, I will have, hopefully all will be fine, because it looks like it should be. My largest number will be my 8th baby with one family. So that's pretty exciting.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. That's coming up very soon.
That's so
So yeah,
are they going to name at least one baby after you if you've delivered all 8?
I have actually one. It doesn't only happen to me once in my career. I have one person who gave their child the middle name Kirsten. So I did have it happen, but not as a first name, as a middle name.
That's sweet.
But the thing about the home birth situation and working as a home birth midwife was that the more, again, I ran into that sort of wall of, there are things I still don't know. And the biggest piece actually for me was, I would take care of someone and they'd have their great home birth, and then they'd have GYN issues, a year later, and be calling me and saying, well, who should I go to? I haven't had a PAP in this many years, or I'm having these symptoms. And I was like, sometimes obviously I could be like, yeah, that's a yeast infection and you should go get some monostat over the counter. But some were obviously more
right
than that. And it really started to bother me, because I really was like, well, if being a midwife means being with women and with birthing people, it also means for a lifetime. And I couldn't do that for a lifetime. Because things started to come up that I couldn't do. So I was very driven by the GYN piece, and also feeling like there were some massive deficits in my education, huge deficits, where things that I had learned, I had thought was sort of the gospel truth. And then I started to do my own research, and I'm like, that's actually not right. Things around preeclampsia and gestational diabetes, and ways in which they're managed, and ways in which we can support people, and sort of there's a lot of folklore almost around some of this, or even things like vitamin K and stories that I would hear about whatnot. I'm like, the more I learned, I was like, that's not really true. And there was a lot of mythology and not much science. And I really like science. I do. I love science.
That's refreshing. I love that. I love that you're saying that, because as a nurse, I always joke in my childbirth classes as an instructor that I am like the crunchiest nurse you'll meet, right? Because I feel like I have my foot in both camps, right? Like I am this, traditional nursing school educated, science believing, research loving medical professional, healthcare professional, but I also like, home birth, cloth diapered, baby wore, co-slept, attachment parented, like all my kids. And so there's got to be a mix. What's best and safest is somewhere in the middle. Sometimes medical intervention is medically necessary, and pretending that preeclampsia can just be cured by diet alone is dangerous. Right. And then but on the flip side, the over medicalization of normal and healthy pregnancy is also dangerous. And that leads to morbidity and mortality for women and babies in our country. So that's awesome. Like that how wonderful to have both.
Well, I think it's
both camps of knowledge on your side.
I think it's definitely the fault of that in the U.S. maternity healthcare system was the destruction of midwifery. I think that when midwifery was destroyed and taken down by medicine, what happened was you had to vilify that entire side. So everything, it was wholesale. Everything about midwifery was bad. It was dirty. It was wrong. It was, it was something that we should just basically say there's no science. And you're like, no science. There is a lot of science. You have midwives who had thousands of births and who could say, this is a cohort. This is literally a study. My clientele is a study of what works. And if you had taken that and you had superimposed science and data collection on it, you would say, you have a paper there. You should be in the Cochrane database because what your clients were. And there was a lot that was happening in hospitals that was garbage. That we were doing things to people that were unethical, unscientific, just completely wrong. But medicine had to kind of come along and just say, we're going to shut everything about that down and we're going to raise up this ivory tower. And so unlike other where the midwifery model of care and the medical model kind of came along together, and it was quickly realized like, hey, there's some really sound stuff here in midwifery. There's some truth to herbal remedies. There's some truth to nutrition. There's some truth to all of this. And this should be integrated. And oh yeah, it seems like probably midwives do an incredibly good job of taking care of low risk women, and doctors do an incredibly good job of taking care of high risk women and birthing people. And hey, we can do this together. This could be really great, but we didn't do that in America. In America, we were like, cutting off our nose to spite our face to basically elevate the medical profession. And I say that with all due respect to OBs who I love and have worked with, because it's not their fault, but it is their history. And it is their responsibility. Midwives have now taken it on as if it's our responsibility to correct that past. And I'm like, that's bull. It is your responsibility to correct that past. You should be as in it as we are to say, this is not a good system. When you look at birth centers, for example, and you say our low risk birthing folks, if they end up having to transfer into the hospital, we still only have a C-section rate of around 6% if they started as low risk at a birth center.
Wow.
And that's out of the Birth Centers 2 study. Those, if you did in that cohort, they compared it with low risk women who entered the hospital first, right? They came in through a hospital-based practice and entered into the hospital in labor, 27% C-section rate. Those are the same people. Why did that happen?
Yeah.
That's an incredible difference. And it really, really speaks to that. So I do feel like I'm frustrated by the fact that, that obstetricians and gynecologists don't feel that they should take up that charge. They think that that's a midwifery thing to do and that we're out there fighting for our profession. I'm like, I'm not fighting for my profession. I am fighting for people who give birth. That's who I'm fighting for. And the reason I opened the birth center was because in its largest part is I could only take care of a certain number of folks, and all of them had to have money in order to pay me. Now I have bartered out the wazoo. I've done home births for chickens. I've had people paint my deck. I've every kind of barter you can possibly imagine. But at some point you can't really continue to function that way. And I needed to figure out how can I work with people who are on mass health. And I was like, if I'm going to open a birth center, we're going to take mass health. We take mass health, which means we can take care of almost anybody then. We take mass health, we take a whole bunch of other insurances. We take almost every major insurance in Massachusetts right now. We also take Husky, which is Connecticut's public insurance program, which was really important to me. I worked as a midwife in Connecticut for a while. We have a lot of border communities of folks who want to have this type of birth. So that's how you do it. You bring it to the people. I can't change hospitals right now, but I can give people a better shot at true full midwifery care. And so that even if they transfer into the hospital, they have reduced their potential of having a C-section by, whatever percent that is. We're 3/4.
Fivefold. I mean, that's huge.
Yeah. I feel like this is.
So this reminds me, Kristen.
This is like your TED Talk right here.
Yeah, this is my TED Talk. Should I do a TED Talk?
This, yes.
Yeah.
And this is my TED Talk.
Yes, absolutely.
I saw Eugene DeClercq talk at Partners in Perinatal Health Conference, which is a conference in Massachusetts, a couple of years back. And I remember, so he is a professor of public health at, is it Boston University?
Yes, he's very
and I remember him talking.
Say that again?
Oh, he did. He's wonderful. He wrote a letter of support.
Oh, good.
I remember him talking about him putting his graduate students on the task of trying to figure out in our current healthcare system, in our state, in our country, how could they create a birth center that could actually survive monetarily with serving the people that they want to serve. And this, I believe it was in Dorchester or Roxbury that his students were trying to figure out how, and and the moral of his talk was that they couldn't because of the way that our public health insurance situation, mass health, whatnot, reimbursement rates for midwives versus doctors and everything that's going against you. They couldn't come up with a way for a freestanding birth center in that part of our state to survive. So I'm curious to know, can you share a little bit about the history about birth centers in general in our state? I know there used to be more birth centers in this country. The numbers have severely dropped over the last 20 years. We've mentioned the Wellesley Birth Center. Can you talk about what that was and how did you make it work? How are you pulling this off? I'm like at the edge of my seat.
I'm trying, and we're definitely trying. So in Massachusetts, we are only the fourth birth center to be licensed. So I think there may have been other birth centers, but I don't know that I think some of them, like I know that there was a kind of birth center that was out in the Berkshires, but it was really just like a private physician who was doing births out of his like office, which was in a house. I mean, that's like 20, 30 years ago. There's the two birth centers that exist now, which are the Cambridge Birth Center and the Beverly Birth Center, but both of them are fully owned by their hospital systems. And I believe Cambridge always was, is my understanding. And I think Beverly started and was briefly freestanding and then was assumed by Leahy, which is now owned by, who is it? Beth Israel, right? Didn't Beth Israel buy out Leahy, I think, or something like that. Anyway, long story short,
I think so. There's a lot of merging going on. Yeah.
So, and then there was the Wellesley Birth Center, which was not owned by midwives. It was actually owned by a physician who had privileges at Wellesley Hospital. And that was because at that particular time, certified nurse midwives were not independent in the state of Massachusetts. In 2012, after an incredible amount of work by the certified nurse midwives who were the Massachusetts chapter of ACNM and a few in particular who fought the good fight, they basically said, midwifery is very different than any other type of nurse practitioner, and we need to gain our independence for a variety of reasons, and we won. So we became independent in 2012, which changed the game entirely for me and my partner, Jenny Miller, to be able to open a birth center, because before that, we would have had to have had a supervising physician. And now we have to have a consulting physician, which we do. We have a fantastic consulting physician, and she is technically, and this is one of the technicalities that needs to change with birth center regulations, we have to call her our medical director, and she is Department of Public Health. She is our medical director, but she is for us. She's basically on paper, and her relationship is consulting, and she consulted with us on all of our policies and procedures. And the only requirement that DPH said we had to have was she had to have admitting privileges at our transfer hospital, which she does. So we have fulfilled all the requirements, but we should be able to have a nurse midwife be in the position of medical director, because there really is no reason for us to have this physician have this pro bono position, because quite frankly, she's not fulfilling that role. It's a paper role that the regulations haven't caught up to yet. So Wellesley Birth Center was, I think, fairly successful for the years that it was there and had like a huge following. But then my understanding is some things happened with the physician owner, and everything was basically on his personal back and financially balanced on him. And when I think there was unrelated to the birth center, as I understand it, a malpractice judgment against him, his malpractice insurance went sky high, and there was just no way to keep the birth center running. That's my understanding of the story. I don't know if that's 100% true or not, but so they closed, and that left these two hospital-based birth centers, which I'm very grateful that they exist, but it is an incredibly different model to be under the auspices of a hospital and having to meet all of those requirements and having to go through everything that you have to go through to be part of the hospital system opposed to what we have, which we are a fully freestanding birth center, which means that the buck stops with the two midwives who own it. And that we got to design it. We got to create the policies. We get to choose who we hire. We choose, who our clients are. The whole sort of picture of what we want to do is it's our choice, and it's fully from the 100% from the midwifery model. We're not interested in any other model. That's the model we like. That's the one we think is best for people who are having babies. So that's the big difference. It's a stroke of luck that we really pulled it off. Could my partner or I have done it 10 years ago? No, we didn't. Neither one of us had enough money. So we definitely have invested quite a lot. I'm almost 50. My partner's 65. My children are in college. Her children are grown. We had some income that prior to that was completely devoted to our own lives. Her husband was our builder. My husband is an attorney. That was incredibly helpful. So we had support for us.
Yeah.
We have a lot of friends in the community, and the number of people who kind of came out of the woodwork to do everything from, help us fundraise, to help us plant our plants, to help us paint the building. My son did a lot of the siding on the building. Ginny's son is really good at tech, and he did all of our wiring that was for all of our internet that's in the building. The list is so long of people who came and said, we want to help. And we did a great online fundraising campaign, raised a bunch of money that way. And still, at the end of the day, we borrowed over $1 million to build this place.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, I want to hear all about that.
That does speak to how special you are in the community, though. I mean, that all those people came out to help you. That's
It is. And my partner, especially, Jenny, has been a midwife in our community for 30 years, and the depth of love for her is enormous. I've been a home birth midwife and have popped around and worked in other places, but she has spent her whole career in the Valley, and it shows by the fact that people will do just about anything for her, which we love. And it's worth it. She's one of the most amazing people I've ever met. So
that's awesome. I want to take a moment in the middle of our show here to ask everybody who's listening to visit babiesincommon.com/show to view all our previous episodes and share them with friends and family on your social media outlets. Our show's available as a video, so you can watch our faces move on our website, as well as it's available as a podcast on our website and Spotify and Apple Podcasts too. So please subscribe.
That's right, Jeanette. You wouldn't want to miss a single one. And we hope you will take this opportunity right now to pause this episode and hop over to the Babies in Common Facebook page or Google listing or even your podcast app to write a positive review for us today to help us reach more families. And lastly, please visit our website or social media channels to learn more about the groups, classes, and other services we offer, as well as plenty of tips and resources to help you rock your birth and thrive as a new parent. All right, back to our show.
And one of those ways to rock your birth is to go to a birth center. Okay, so tell us more about this $1 million. I've heard this number for years, that it takes $1 million to open a birth center. And so what is, I know you built the building, like literally there was nothing there. You didn't like renovate a building, you built it, you designed it. Mm-hmm. So that costs money. And in Massachusetts, buildings are very expensive, never mind all the medical equipment and regulations. And then, what about the regulations too? So tell us it all.
So we initially, we didn't want to have to build a building. We wanted to do a renovation. That was our initial desire. We looked at a couple of different spaces, and we actually submitted a full set of plans to the Department of Public Health to renovate a spot, which we actually would have been in East Hampton, which is like 10 minutes from where we are now. Lovely, kind of like it was a building that had a pediatrician's office in it, so it had already had like some of the things that we needed in terms of ADA compliance and things like that. And we were totally rejected after spending an enormous amount of time on our plans. I mean, we have a wonderful set of architects who basically have donated they did that plan for us and the plan for this building, along with Jeff, who is Ginny's husband, who is a builder and does design as well, put, hundreds of hours into that process and the application. And it's very expensive too, you don't get to submit an application for free to the state. So thousands of dollars that you need to do that. They said, no, this does not. And the reason they said no was there were certain things. And again, this is why we go back to the policies needing to change. They had certain things in their policy that we were like, well, we can do both of those things in one room. Like, we don't need a conference room. Because what birth center needs to have a conference room? We can have a room that does double duty. Why can't we have a room that is both a conference room and is also, like when we need it to be, and is also the sort of ante-room nurses lounge when we want to use it as a nurses lounge? Things like that, they were like absolutely a no-go on. And then rules like, for like an exam table, you had to have 24 inches completely around 3/4 of the exam table. Otherwise you couldn't, that would not be an exam room. And we had one room in there where it was like 24 inches the whole way around, except for like this one little spot where it dropped down to like 18 inches. And they're like, nope, you can't do it. Like there's unbelievable, meticulous. And I suppose this was a surgical center. Maybe I would understand those rules having to be incredibly rigid, but we're like, this is a birth center. Like I'll work around that 18 inches. It's fine. Yeah. I can get on that. I mean, I do have a pretty big butt, but I can do it. I can fit.
I have to, I can squeeze in there.
But those were the kind of things that they dinged us on. We tried to do a revision. They didn't take our revision. So huge amounts of money basically flushed right down the toilet.
Hey, and wait, one more thing. And that's an appropriate use of the word revision. Our last episode was on how words matter and how people are calling tongue tie releases, they're calling them revisions, and I'm going to revise my baby and that kind of stuff. So we're trying not to use the word revision for that, but that was a good use of it.
Revision, right? Yes. So the more we thought about it, we were like, we're not going to be able to, I'll back up and say, this was hard enough to try to do it in a fairly modern space. I mean, of course, we had the idea like, we'd love to renovate some big, beautiful Victorian house. Forget it. There is no way.
Yeah,
so
right.
For your birth center, just forget that idea right now. You'd be better off going and putting your birth center like next to like Big Y, because that building is going to be set up for you.
Wow.
Seriously, birth center, Big Y, they can be next door neighbors because they're going to have the proper air.
That sounds great to me.
Yeah, why not? Do a little shopping. Yeah. Go have your baby.
Exactly. Grab a pizza.
Go get a birthday cake afterwards.
Rotisserie chicken.
Exactly. So we were like, well, what are we going to do? That there's just nothing on the market. We don't see any buildings that will work. And then like a sort of miracle happened where this house that we had walked by many, many times in downtown Florence, which had a big stockade fence around it. The people who owned the house all of a sudden decided to put that piece of land on the market, and it turned out to be zoned. So it was, they had a huge, like a 2+ acre plot. Their house was on one side and they had bought this extra acreage and never used it. And they decided to sell it because they could. It was an independent parcel and it was zoned commercial. And it was zoned commercial residential. You could have gone either way. So it went on the market and we bought it, which of course, again, speaks to you have to have some cash to do that. We just bought it. And we were like, okay, that's it. This is where our birth center is going. It is 86 feet from the fire station and the EMS. We literally can wave to them outside our window. Hi, EMS, how are you?
That's awesome.
They feel like so safe because EMS is right there. And then we are 3 minutes from our transferring hospital, Cooley Dickinson. So literally a left and a right and straight down the road, and we can be in there. We can be up on the unit probably in less than 10 minutes if we needed to.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, some hospitals are so big, it takes you 10 minutes to get from one side of the unit to the other.
Yeah, so it's pretty good. You kind of can zoom in through the ED, go to the back, up through the elevators, and you're on labor and delivery, which is good.
So that's so exciting though, as much as it was a shame to have to like scrap the original plans, you know, as a nurse that's worked on labor and delivery units that were clearly not designed by nurses, I can understand how exciting it might be to have the option to really do it the way you know it's going to flow for your work style. So can you tell us about like how you went into like designing the rooms, the layout, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, I mean, I think so. Our building is in two kind of separate pieces, right? So it was actually three separate pieces because we have a first floor and a second floor. The entire office and birth center is all on the first floor because it has to be. It could have been on the second floor if we wanted to put in an elevator, but an elevator costs about $100,000 to put in, so no elevator for us. So the front part of our building is our office, and our office is set up. We have kind of a living room when you walk in. We don't really have a reception desk. We don't have a reception area. We have a big farm table that our receptionist sits at, and someday people will be able to socialize, hopefully, in our
Yeah.
reception. Right now, everybody
Right.
calls from their car, and we let one person in at a time, and so someday we'll really get to utilize it the way we want to. But for right now, it is peaceful, and there's usually just one set of folks in there at a time. We have a little office for ourselves that's our just where our desks are and whatnot. And then one of the things that was really important to us was not to have a room that was not an exam room. So that's actually where we do most of our prenatals. We have a room that basically has we call it the big comfy couch, and you have the big comfy couch, and we have plants in there and comfy chairs, and that's the space where we do our prenatals. If somebody has to have a non-stress test, they can stretch out on the comfy couch, and it has a big comfy quilt over it. It's like, and I think it's really, again, it's very non-threatening. And the other thing that's nice about it is we made it very just very simple. There's not actually a lot of baby imagery in that space, because we use that space if we have to have harder conversations with people. If somebody has had a loss, or if someone comes in and wants to talk about infertility, we specifically tried to make the birth center have a lot of images that were about affirming of life, but not so much about sweet little babies, because we take care of people who are trying to get pregnant. My partner does an enormous amount of IUIs and ICIs, and we see people in there who are struggling to get pregnant. We also take care of a large section of the population we care for is queer, and we have multiple trans families who we take care of. We have a lot of lesbians who we care for. We really wanted to make sure that this space felt very much like this is a space that holds you. This isn't a space about pink and blue. This isn't a space about male or female.
Right.
This isn't a space about just birth, because we have to deal sometimes with the other side of that too. So it was really wonderful to be able to create that. And if you go in, some people might never notice it, but we took that very seriously in terms of how we wanted that space to feel for people who come in there. We want anybody, however unique they are, to feel like I can see myself here. And not to feel like definitely don't see myself here because something has come kind of crashing into their space, and like that really feels like the antithesis of me. So that's been nice. We both have exam rooms too. Our exam rooms though are different in that they're very like I have two big comfy chairs and a big rug on the floor and paintings on my wall. And part of that is like, that's how I want to spend my time. I spend a lot of time in that room.
Right.
Has a big chest in there. She has a rocking chair. We just try to make them feel like these are rooms that you would have in your house, and there happens to be an exam table in it. But the exam table is not like the feature of the space. It's like the feature of the space is we're going to sit and talk. So there's a talking space, because that's probably the most important information we're going to gain is from that talking first. And then we have a little door. We have a glass door with a curtain on it, and it has a little sign on it that says babies. And that's how you identify going into the birth center. So that opens up into where the birth center is. And the birth center side, we have a lactation room, a nurse's station. We do all of our own laundry. We always show people our laundry room because we actually love our washer and dryer. We're very proud of it. They're beautiful, gorgeous Electrolux washer and dryers that we're like, see, I mean, we actually love our washers. You have to have really good washers. We do
Hashtag adulting.
Hashtag, I love my washer and our autoclave. We're very proud of our autoclave. So, we set that all up so that like our nurse station, our laundry, our dirty utility just makes kind of like a little triangle. So it's really easy because the nurse who is working, and the midwives as well, we all kind of work together. I think of our nurses much, much more as birth assistants than I think of them as nurses. Like, I'm glad they have their RN skills, but they are a part of bringing this baby in, and their responsibility is huge for the baby. at the birth, and they're really the one who is responsible for the baby, and they are assisting in the birth as much as they are doing anything. So we wanted that to be easy for flow for people, because you're kind of after the birth, and even in between, you can really be having to work in that space. And we wanted it also to be pretty, so it's pretty too. I don't think that as a provider, I hate working in dingy, ugly spaces.
Yeah.
Like really nice wood cabinets in our nurses station. We put, real granite countertops in there. Like this is, and those were, the Mennonites did, who I do births for. They did all the cabinetry for us. The
Oh, wow.
countertops. A gentleman who I kind of hired him out of the blue to do the countertops, and then he gave us this enormous discount. He's like, my sister's been a midwife in Seattle forever. He's like, this is for the midwives. So great.
Oh,
Really big discount on these, because we really can't afford granite countertops, but that's how we afforded them, because his sister happens to be a midwife. And then we have two lovely birth suites. They're small. They're not, I see a lot of birth centers that have done kind of like these palatial spaces.
But from the pictures, they look really like there's plenty of room. They're not tiny.
But they're not huge. They're kind of, and it was, it's intentional. We wanted it to feel intimate, and I didn't want people to feel like there's, this huge amount of empty space. And we we do a lot of water births. So the tub is right in the room. It's not in a separate room, because we anticipate that we will use the water for many, many, if not most of our births. Our tubs came from England. They're the Adelmeyer tubs. They were designed with the input of about 45 different midwives who got and decided, like, here are the things that are important to us in a tub. And I love them.
I didn't even know that existed. That's really cool.
They're actually very simple, but some of the little details, like it has a really wide lip on it, so it's really easy to lean on. It has a very high water level. So, if the person who's giving birth is sitting in the tub, no matter how big they are, for the most part, you can get the water all the way over their chest without having it do that blurpy sound that it makes when the drain goes on, which drives everybody crazy.
Yeah.
It has a really nice seat in it. It has a little space that's kind of cut out if you have to do a Doppler check, where you can kind of put your arm underneath the lip to make it a little easier for you to kind of reach in. Just little things. It has a disposable drain. So for the purposes of making things a little more sanitary, the whole actual drain and cap actually pops out, and it's disposable to deal with sort of, concerns about germs and things like that. I love them. They're great. They're simple, but really wonderful. And the space is big enough for two people, but very comfortable for one person as well. So yeah, we really love them. And then we designed our bathrooms just to be zero threshold ones. And they're sort of European style in that the shower is the whole room. Mm-hmm. So when you go in there, you can close the door and the whole thing can get wet if it needs to. We even have our toilet paper has like a cover over it that protects it from getting wet. It's on Amazon. They've been a godsend. So that's our space. And we have two rooms. One is we decided that we felt like a lot of people either respond to cool tones or warm tones. So one room is very warm toned with like warmer wood, and one of the walls is orange, and the other room has very cool tones. It's kind of greens and grays, and it's very true. People definitely have like a quick reaction as to which one they like. That's our birth rooms.
Oh, it's so funny because as you're describing that, I'm thinking, ooh, I would want the warm one. Because I'm always cold. I had like an immediate reaction to that. Like
that's my favorite room, and that's the room that I guess I had a little more influence on. But my partner, she loves sort of cool greens and fern colors and like that kind of thing. And it's definitely true. There are definitely people who walk in and that's very relaxing for them. Like that makes them kind of feel like it's almost sort of outdoorsy to them, and that gentle sort of green.
Yeah. But the fact that you even thought of that, that's so cool. That's so great. So on to less aesthetic and more clinical. What about the medical logistics? How are you deciding who goes to the hospital, and do they just drive? Do you always call the ambulance across the street? How do you work that out for everybody to hear?
As far as like our parameters, we start off in that we are accepting people who are low risk into our practice, which means, there are some things that we can't do. We do have some rules. For example, like if somebody has type 1 diabetes, we actually, we can't take them at the birth center. Or if someone's going to have twins, we can't take them at the birth center. If there really aren't that many things. Like when I go down the list, it's not that many. If you have a breech, we don't deliver breeches at the birth center. At the moment, and again, this is something that we, will someday maybe hope to change. We cannot do VBACs. That's actually prohibited by DPH at the moment. Is a primary VBAC. We're not allowed to do primary.
That's
yeah.
Not a good thing.
Not a good thing, especially because the more research that's done about VBACs, the more we know that whatever created that policy when the policies were first put together is no longer true. It's simply, looking at risk through different lenses. And now we know that many, many times that's not the case. So, it's frustrating, but.
Well, you had mentioned to us before we started recording that your degree in health policy might come in handy in the near future with maybe helping to change some of this, especially since you're going through it all from the ground up, literally. So there's a lot of things that, don't make sense because either it's not based on science and research, or it's based on a medical model of care that you're not providing, or it's based on something completely like totally unrelated. Like you're saying, a surgical center is not the same thing as a dental office, is not the same thing as a birth center. And, I remember, I don't remember which documentary I was watching, but I believe it was a documentary in which someone was talking about how hard it is to build a birth center, because one of the requirements, for example, was that you would be able to get turn a stretcher, like have two stretchers go side by side in like a hallway. And they were like, we would never need that. Like if we had an emergency, EMS would come in with, people walk, let's be honest, most out of hospital birth transfers, people are walking to their car, never mind an ambulance, but they would bring, it's a board, they'd bring a board in to strap you to. You wouldn't ever need a hallway in a birth center where two stretchers could go past each other.
Yeah.
So
by far of the most ridiculous requirement that we have is that we had to purchase something called, what is it called? It's called a flushing sink toilet. This is I love the look on Jeanette's face.
Oh my God, I know exactly what that is. It's what you empty bedpans into, right?
Toilet.
It looks like a giant urinal with a flusher.
With a flusher.
Yes. Yes, hospitals have this for emptying bedpans. Oh my God, that's so funny.
But the funny thing is, like on labor and delivery, where I have worked at Berkshire Medical Center or at Danbury Hospital, we have them there. And you know what's in there? Other crap, because nobody uses it. It's usually still like towels or urine specimen cups, or it just becomes because no one uses that. You just go into the bathroom in the client's room and you dump.
Absolutely. Nobody ever takes a bucket of urine all the way to the dirty utility room. It's ridiculous.
Never. Exactly. But this was something that was on our list of and we could not get them to budge.
What?
Wow.
We had multiple times getting waivers for that. We're like, this is ridiculous. We don't need this. This is crazy. And so instead, between the plumbing and the actual item, and of course, this is a highly specialty item, right? So
it's expensive.
Charge a ridiculous amount of money for it because the only people who ever have to buy this are hospitals who don't need them most of the time anyway.
But if you go back and look at who wrote the regulations, I wonder if that person either owned a company like that made those, or like had a deal. That,
We're gonna make sure that everybody has to have the flushing sink toilet.
The flushing sink toilet.
Which we have a board over. We actually.
Oh, so you couldn't get out of it. You still had to buy it, you're saying?
We had to buy it.
Oh my God.
Wow.
So that's our craziest regulation that we had to deal with. And we laugh about it all the time. And right now we have a board that covers it and we stack things on top of it. So yeah, it's there. And we have to remind ourselves, we're like, don't forget to flush it every once in a while. Just you should, you want the water to turn over. Like, don't
Right.
And anytime you have someone from DPH come for a tour someday, I need you to show that to them every time and say, look, here it is.
Here's the flushing toilet.
Make a check mark on your paper.
The crazy thing was they did come for their walkthrough. They never even looked at the flushing sink toilet the first time.
Oh,
yeah, not at all. There were so many things that we were so hyper worried about. And it turned out like their list of stuff wasn't even congruent with our list of stuff. We're like,
sure.
They were more worried about things like, did we have a proper grievance policy for, if a nurse had a grievance, who would her advocate be? I'm like, I don't even have enough employees for her to have an advocate. For her to have an advocate, and then also who would she grieve to, and then who would be on, if that grievance had to go to committee, who would be on the committee? I'm like, there's only 3 people who work here right now. Like, how do I create a policy for this?
Listen, we're going to have them arm wrestle in the damn conference room that you made us build. That's really a nurse's lounge. Okay. That's what we're going to do. That's our grievance policy. A thumb war.
I was very, very concerned that we didn't have one that was worded properly. I'm like, how do I write this? We are never going to have enough people for your committee. It's going to have, the person who has the grievance is going to have to serve on the committee. Did you think you were, treated poorly? Yes, I think you were treated poorly, which is like this back. So, crazy stuff.
So speaking about relationships, what is your relationship like with your area hospital? Are they excited that you're there? Do they feel like you're a super big, competitor with, so how does that work?
What they talk about when they're not around us, but so far I would say, I think it's been very good. We started, long before we started the process of, we've been building the birth center, and we were actually doing our first set of designs for over in East Hampton. We were already talking with them about a transfer agreement, because basically we knew if we couldn't get the support of the local hospital, we were done for. Like, there was no point in doing anything else. So that had to be really early on in the process. So at that particular time, she's not there any longer, but there was a nurse midwife who was the service director for Cooley Dickinson's Nurse Midwives. And, luckily she's had a really varied career and has kind of worked all over the place, and really believes in home birth and birth centers. And she had done a lot of work with the transfer agreement, their transfer arrangements with the home birth community. And even though what we do is a bit different, there's a lot of similarities for sure. So it was really great that groundwork was laid. And I have to hand it to, like, there have been some home birth midwives. My own midwife, who I worked with for years, Darna Harvey MI, is one of the people who has been outstanding in working so hard. My partner, Jenny Miller, these are people who for years have been working on trying to make sure that we smoothed the road for home birth transfers. So because of so much that's been done over the years, that process that we walked into was like, there's already an understanding of people have babies not in the hospital, but sometimes have to get to the hospital. And we need to make that as straightforward as possible for these folks, because that's what we do. This is a community hospital. That's their choice and their right. Let's do this the right way. Our agreement with them is a little bit larger because we use them for other things too. So right now, our anatomy stands are done by them. We do some of our labs can be done at their lab. So and if we have some folks, for example, right now who are trying for primary VBACs, but wanted to see us as their midwives for the majority of their pregnancy, and then are transferring in to the nurse midwifery practice there. So yeah, I mean, so far so good. Everything has been pretty smooth. I think midwives, luckily, that group of midwives they're good people. They believe in options, and they don't see us as a threat. They see us as part of the continuum of care that should be available in every community. And I think actually the docs that are there at this point too, for the most part, my experiences with them have been really good. That there is an understanding that maybe they have certain feelings about what they think is risky versus not risky, but the reality is the evidence doesn't support that. Sure. And on top of that, people have the right to make their own choices. Mm-hmm. And you don't get to decide for me what I think is risky versus what somebody else might think is risky. I get to decide for myself. And I feel like that is in general pretty well held by the folks at Cooley Dickinson. So we're very appreciative of what we have. And, I'm not just saying that to like toot their horn, but they've been good. They it's not like they exactly rolled out the red carpet, but they came pretty close to it. Yeah.
That's awesome.
And I will say that Partners, which is, their larger entity, when we were first applying to them and saying we wanted to have a transfer arrangement with them, the word that came down was like, from the higher ups at Partners was you at Cooley Dickinson, you guys need to make this happen. Because if that's what the community wants, then we are the community hospital. We should make that possible. And I think more community hospitals need to have that attitude.
Yes.
That is the attitude to have. It's like, if your community wants this, don't become like so myopic that you're like, no, they can only have what we want them to have. You have to say, no, the community wants this, then we will support this. We will make it possible. If you build it, they will come. And we all need to embrace that and say, hey, people are going there. They're making the choice. Sometimes people are going to have to come to us. Let's make this as easy as possible, because making it hard endangers the lives of birthing people and babies. And that is the bottom line.
And the reality is I wish more OBGYNs especially would understand that caring for people that want a different model of care than you provide is stressful for everybody involved. I had a patient once at the hospital that I worked at most recently, and she had her first baby unmedicated in a birth center in North Carolina. Picture perfect birth center situation. Her husband gets transferred. She comes up to Massachusetts. There's no birth centers anywhere near where she lives. So she gets care at the local hospital, which is where I was working. And the provider that she was seeing is actually one of my favorite OBs there. She's wonderful, but she is absolutely a medical model of care provider. She's very respectful of people's desires to, to have the birth that they want, but that is not, and she's very open. She always jokes like, well, that's just what you hippies do, Melissa, kind of thing. And so this patient came in, I happened to be on, it was Kismet, and she, explains to me her birth plan, which is, it's exactly what you would expect for someone who had a successful out of hospital birth, right? She wants intermittent auscultation. She doesn't want an IV unless medically necessary. She wants to push in any position that she wants, blah, blah, blah. So I explained to her, I'm happy to advocate for all of this for you, but that's not the way things generally go down here. And the provider that happens to be on is not going to understand literally anything that you're asking for. So I had to bring this birth plan to this doctor. And like I said, we were friends. She's a wonderful person and a very talented surgeon. And I was like, she wants this and this and this, but don't worry. I know how to do intermittent auscultation because I trained with midwives, and don't worry, I can get an IV started in, a dehydrated, elderly nun. And I can, I'm going on and on and on. And she's looking at this birth plan, and she breaks out into a cold sweat. And she's like, Melissa, I've never even heard of intermittent auscultation. And she literally meant it. She had been an OB for close to 25 years, and she had never, ever heard of intermittent auscultation. And I was like, trust me, A1 supports it. It's evidence-based. Do you trust me? And the only reason why she agreed to this was because I had such a good relationship with her. And she's like, okay, Dubois, I'll give you what you want, but you better get that IV in if she has one stick of bleeding. And so funny thing was, long story short, after 30 minutes of the placenta not coming, I had to put an IV in her because she ended up needing help getting her placenta out, but I got it first try.
There you go.
But so, it was stressful for everybody involved. And she said at one point, oh God, why doesn't she just have a home birth? She literally said that, the OB, because she's reading this birth plan and she's like, she wants to do right by this patient, but everything this patient is asking for is the opposite of what she does.
Right.
And it was just funny to me that someone who would never probably encourage somebody that she's caring for to have a home birth was like, oh God, why doesn't she just have a home birth? And so, I wish that OBs in the area realize, if you're not a good match, it's not going to work. And there are plenty of people that desire a medical model of care. And the 10 years I've been teaching, they're like, I feel most comfortable with an OB. I sometimes feel that's the case, sometimes with people who had a very, medicalized fertility journey, maybe they've had a situation in the past that, and they feel most comfortable in a hospital environment. Everybody should be able to give birth where they feel most comfortable. And with the provider that's going to give them the best care that they want. So I wish more OBs saw that. And you're right. It can't be all on the midwives. It has to be on the OBs to elevate midwifery, and we have to work together. So it's so refreshing to hear that you have a good transfer relationship.
You make a really incredible point, Melissa, though, that how much we can change people through relationship. That is critical. I don't feel like I can kick and scream all I want and, send angry emails or do those. The truth of the matter is, like, if I really, where we make change, where we change people's minds about things are when I'm, it was just like a week and a half ago where I was like standing in front of looking at a tracing with an OB for someone that we transferred in labor, and we're sitting there looking at it, and I was like, it's not telling me anything bad, but it sure isn't telling me anything good. And he's like, you can see that? I'm like, yeah, that's a pseudosinusoidal pattern. And she's having, yeah, those are subtle
Yeah.
late. And he's like, you can see that? I'm like, yeah, I didn't
I'm a professional.
I do know how to read tracing. Like, I've been doing this for a really
But
long
that's
time.
also part of the problem, right? Is that too many care providers don't understand what other care providers do.
Yes.
True. Well, and the funny thing is, he thought, and he's a nice OB and everything. I think because I work outside of the hospital, he immediately thought I didn't know how those things worked. And I was like, I've worked in a hospital. I spent 6 years of my career in a hospital, and I'd worked for a period of time in a hospital and a birth center at the same time that were across the street from each other. So I was running sometimes between a birth center birth and a hospital birth and being like, intermittent auscultation over here, tracing over here, epidural over here, tub birth over here, back and forth and back and forth. Probably the greatest experience of my life was really seeing in such absolute, and I was the provider in both of those situations, seeing the incredible power of the institution versus the birth center. And the birth center is an institution too. It's its own little institution, but it's different. And to have days where I would do a birth in both settings on a single day and really feel how that impacts everything that happens, and how people viewed me when I was in the hospital and how people viewed me. I have the same credentials, I have the same skills,
Right.
but in those two different settings, there was like, here, you're one kind of midwife, the out of hospital birth midwife, like,
Mm-hmm.
and then here, you're our trusted colleague, certified nurse midwife. And it was like, I'm like the same person. I'm the same person all day long, every single day. I don't change, but the perspective was different. But the only way we built bridges there was just constantly being like, I will communicate with you. I will not get mad at you. I will not say that there's something wrong with you because you don't understand how I work. I will not fail you in any way. I will just keep telling you, this is the truth. Here's the truth. So what you're doing and what you did with that OB is like a perfect example. And I'm sure Jeanette has had many doula experiences where, like, I'm just going to speak the truth. I'm just going to help you understand what's true. This is not an opinion. This is just truth.
Now, well, I stopped being doula for a long time ago, but now I'm an IBCLC, so I
know
do that.
it's a whole different thing of truth. But you were a doula for a long time, though.
Yeah, for a while. Yeah. Sure. No,
there's a whole set of truths in the land of IBCLCs.
It's so funny, Kirsten, that you're talking about, I'm the same person no matter what environment I'm in, because I had a home birth last year in 2019 with my daughter. She was my third baby. I had 2 hospital births before that, and I had been working in a hospital-based OB setting or with hospital-based OBs for, 13 years. And after I came back from having my maternity leave after that home birth, and I didn't tell anybody I was having a home birth when because I just didn't want the drama at work when I was, pregnant, but obviously people found out. And then I come back to work, labor and delivery, and I'm one of the most experienced labor and deliveries on the floor at the time. There was one patient one night where I went to the doc and she was like, "What do you think?" And I was like, "Oh God, I think you're going to need to use a vacuum." And she goes, "Wait, I thought you never said things like that, right?" I was like,
"It's true.
Just because I had a home birth doesn't mean I don't understand that this patient is definitely going to need a vacuum. Like, the baby's like OP, having D cells, like she's been in labor for like 36 hours, like, and I'm just like, no, I came out here to tell you that, like, we need to start having a conversation now. So we're not having a conversation about a vacuum in an emergency.
Right.
Like, so, we have to intersect, right? Midwifery is so much an art, but it is also a science. And midwives know so much. And one thing that I love that we talked about in this episode is, like you said, midwives don't only just provide birth services, but services for, people with uteruses throughout their entire life. And so there's so much. It's funny because you tell people that you work with midwives or that you're a home birth nurse, or I'm sure you get this. And I hear a lot people still in Massachusetts, which is fairly liberal and, has more midwives than other states, say things like, people still do that?
Mhm.
Or what's a midwife?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, wow, it's 2020 and
Yeah.
people
Even
still
people
don't
who are
know what a
seeing midwives will say to me like, "Oh, I had a doctor's appointment." And I was like, "You
midwife
mean a
is.
midwife appointment?"
I have been the midwife in appointments where people will tell their child, "Oh, we're going to go in and see the doctor now." And I'm like, "What? I'm not the doctor. I'm a midwife." And they're like, "Oh, yeah, whatever." And I'm like, "No,
No, I want you to know I'm a midwife.
say what it is. I want your child to know the word midwife." I'm like, I'm not embarrassed. My mother, who is now, of course, thrilled that I'm a midwife. And when I had my second child at home, at first she was like very concerned about this, and then she was like, "Oh, I was born at home." I'm like, "And I turned out okay. And all 13 of us were born at home. That lady who came to the house all the time, that must have been the midwife." Suddenly my mother had like an epiphany about that, like,
Wow.
midwives are okay. It's okay to be a midwife. It's not a bad word. And Ginny and I joke sometimes that people will think like, "Yep, we're a midwife. That just means, we put a knife under the bed to cut the pain. That's what we do. We will give you a washcloth to bite on." But that's it. Nothing else.
We boil the water.
Boil the water. Over here at the birth center with big kettles.
Well, I say screw that TED Talk, and instead, I can't wait for your book.
Yes, absolutely. I can't wait.
Because you've got such a breadth of experience, which most midwives don't have.
I am so lucky to have done all the different things I've done.
And you're just beginning in this phase, and you opened a birth center in the pandemic. You just opened in August.
Yes.
I know.
Talk
Kudos to
about
you.
crazy. Opening a birth center in a pandemic. Really wild. Although I will say we definitely have some pandemic clients that are specifically with us because they
Yes.
don't want to go to the hospital.
Right.
It's been really interesting to watch this evolution of risk. And I think a lot of home birth midwives experience this as well, where you had people for whom there was too much risk to be at home when there wasn't COVID. And now they view the whole thing completely differently. They're like, "No, there's too much risk to being at the hospital." And it's not even just COVID itself. It's more, I might lose the potential of my partner being able to be with me all the time. And I know most hospitals have, abandoned all of that and people are allowed to have their partner with them. But I think it still looms out there for folks that like, well, could it get so bad again that I might have to birth by myself? And that is,
I just had a friend who had a hospital birth, didn't see her son for a week because they're not allowing children, in, and she ended up having a cesarean. And so, yeah, I mean, an evolution of risk. I think that's a great term.
The reason that we started this whole podcast show, was the first episode was about giving birth during COVID and what do you do? And what are your rights? And how do you decide whether to have a home birth or not? And in the second episode, I think it was, we were talking with a hospital-based midwife and a home birth midwife, like, how do you decide? Because you can't make those decisions out of fear, but that was the active feeling that people were having. And now there's another option. There's a birth center. So
there is.
Yes. So do you have a takeaway message? Yeah. Do you have a takeaway message that, because you're accepting new patients and you accept all types of insurances and you are taking patients, people are coming to you. We talked about before we started taping from all over the state, sometimes Connecticut, Central Mass, Western Mass, so do you have a takeaway message that you would like expecting couples in our community to know about the Seven Sisters Midwifery Community Birth Center?
Oh, I wish I would have written something. I should have like really polished this. I think, I think my takeaway message about birth centers is that it has been a long time coming in Massachusetts, and that we view ourselves as a continuum of the care that should be available to everyone all across the state. We are currently the only freestanding birth center that's midwife-owned, and we're the first ones ever to do it, but we should definitely not be the last. I would invite, anyone, whether you're a consumer or you're another midwife or you're someone who just is, wants to see something like this happen, send me an email. Like, I don't want us to be the last. I don't want people to have to travel from Central Mass to come to see me. I think we'll do just fine in Western Mass. I want people to be able to leave their house in, Boylston and be able to drive 20 minutes to go to a birth center or less. That should be an option everywhere in the state. In a state that has tons of midwives working, 30% of the births are midwives are catching 20, I think it's almost 30% now in the state of Massachusetts. It's a lot. That this should proliferate, especially in light of the fact that we are independent. I think I will always love home birth. I will always, that will always be a very special place for me, and I still do them here and there. But birth center birth is that sort of sweet spot, I think, for a lot of people, where you don't have to write a birth plan to ask for some of the things that should be standard. You don't have to ask for skin to skin. You don't have to ask for delayed cord clamping. You don't have to ask to birth in any position you want to. You don't have to ask to have a water birth. You don't have to ask to be able to be in the shower with your partner and we're going to close the door and just be alone for a while. You have to ask for intermittent auscultation. You have to ask for any of that. That's standard of care. That is what we do. And we will keep you safe and help you have your baby there, unless for some reason it becomes not safe for you to have your baby there. And then we have excellent ways of getting you to a place to safely have your baby. I think that we are a model that takes kind of the ancient art of midwifery, which is truly an ancient art, and it melds it with evidence-based medicine and science. And that is what we should all be striving for. We should be able to have access to all of it. I want to be able to give my clients every opportunity to be able to have every tool that they need to achieve a good birth. However that happens in the end, I mean, you can have a birth that starts in a birth center and ends as a C-section, and it can be a good birth because you got to make all the decisions. And I feel like we can give that to people. We are intentionally small. We're not taking more than about a dozen or so. We're pushing the envelope right now a little bit, but a dozen or so births a month. So we want to be able to continue to give people that type of care. And I believe like we are going to, we are going to do everything we can to see insurance companies reimburse us fairly. We're going to fight. I want to put in a little tiny plug for Marnie, who owns IBSI, which is the Midwives Innovation Billing Service. We've been working with her and a couple of people there, and incredibly helpful. And these are people who know the birth center world really, really well. And, we are getting some really good contracts from insurance through a lot of fighting, but that's how we're going to stay alive. And that's also how we're going to get other birth centers to proliferate, because if I get a good contract, that means the next person who comes along can say, hey, we just want the same contract that Seven Sisters has. Give us that contract. And actually we're in Boston, so up it by about 25%.
Yeah.
Because our expenses are a lot more. But we'll have a place to go from. And it won't be some hospital's contract. It'll be a true freestanding birth center's contract. So you can say, that's what we want because that's what we need. And you get your clients behind you. We basically are going to get a contract from Health New England, not because of what we did, but because people got fired up. Our clients coming to us said, we want this care. And they called and they wrote letters, and now they're going to take us on and contract with us. So it's a battle, but we're getting there. And, we just hope to be an example for what can be. There should be, at least 4 or 5 birth centers in Mass for our size. Absolutely. And I'll help anyone out there who wants advice. Happy to do it. So.
Oh my goodness. I think you're going to inspire people.
I know. I'm getting a little verklempt.
Like, ooh, we need to do this now. Is this our new project?
I'm just thinking, like, how have I not met you yet? Pre-COVID, I was pretty circling all the birth conferences. I know a lot of people in a lot of places, and you're like my new hero, if I could say that.
Right?
Yeah, you are. You're a trailblazer.
She just asked if you were related to somebody.
Are you related to Molly and Sean?
Yeah, that my brother-in-law, and sister-in-law.
You know, I was at 2 of her births, right?
I do. I do. I didn't know if you remembered them though. So like, I always make.
My son worked for them then for a summer. My son.
Oh my God! So my husband's brother is Sean.
I love Sean. And Molly is like, kind of like, talk about like one of my heroes.
Oh,
Dear,
I know. I know.
she's amazing.
She is amazing. Yeah. So,
Like,
yeah, she's Molly, my sister-in-law, who was the first person to have a home birth in our family. She was one of my mom's inspirations. And what's funny is when we told my in-laws that we were having a home birth last summer, they were like, "Oh, well, isn't that just what you guys do nowadays?" Because she had two home births and then we had, they were like completely unfazed. And this is a woman who like gave birth like with a spinal, formula fed off the bat, like just like, she was like, we didn't have baby wearing back then. I'm like, it was 1983, Margaret. Like people definitely wore their babies. So it's just funny. She's like, oh, isn't that just what you guys do nowadays? And I hope that one day people say that about birth centers, that it's not just like this, fringe thing, that like you said, it should be incorporated in our community. It should be available to anybody who wants that level of care.
And there are
because
states that are doing a great job at it. California has birth centers, Oregon, Washington State, Texas, Florida, North Carolina, not South Carolina, but North Carolina. South Carolina does have some birth centers as well. I mean, there are definitely states that are out there that are really like, are doing what they can on the policy level to help birth centers proliferate. Massachusetts, I mean, I just believe like, yes, we're a medical state. Everyone wants to talk about how the AMA is so strong here. They are, but this isn't about breaking anybody. This is about being like, we're not trying to break you. We're not going up against, we don't need to go up against the AMA. We have the upper hand. What we have is right. We're like, this is science. This is choice. This is science. This is freedom. This is all the things that we all believe in. So we don't need to continue on with kind of a patriarchal view of the AMA. The AMA just needs to be like, hey, that's right. We want all those things too. Okay. So there's no reason to block birth centers from, proliferating in the state. And there's every reason to make it easier for them. I recognize that hospitals will always want to take every piece of, money that they can possibly get. And I realize that hospitals struggle too. And I know that some people say, oh, how could you put a birth center in a community where maybe the local hospital is going to lose business because of that? I'm like, well, if a whole lot of patients shift over to that birth center, that tells you something about what's going on at that hospital, and maybe things need to change there. Like, we can't have this view of like, we're gonna damage somebody else because we're doing good. If we're doing good, we're doing good. I'm sorry if you're not doing so good, but our aim is to do good for birthing people, and this is one piece. It's not the whole thing, but it should absolutely be an option for more people.
Wow. Well,
amazing.
Those are some good words to make a graphic of, for sure. And for your website. Well, gosh, that was a great discussion. We should just thank you for being here. And I know more people are going to seek you out, and I know you're going to inspire people across the land to seek out ways to raise money and figure out how to contact you so that they can say, how can I do the same thing?
I hope so. I hope 5 years from now, we're talking about that there is happily a wonderful birth center in Central Mass, because there should be, as there should be other places as well. But because that's where you are, I know that you will be a voice for it too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So be sure to visit sevensistersmidwifery.com to learn more about Kirsten and Ginny and their wonderful birth center. Follow them on social media. And we hope that you all have enjoyed today's show, and we hope you'll tune in again. Remember, Babies in Common is a community for you. After all, we all have babies in common. Awesome. Thank you, Kirsten.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. This was fantastic. I so appreciate it. Thanks for having me.